murder case that is now 40 years old. Grand Ole Opry legend Stringbean Aikman and his wife were murdered in their home back in 1973.
Hee Haw was once the cozy fire that filled living rooms with laughter, country tunes, and unforgettable characters for nearly 3 decades. But what many don't realize is that several of the show's most beloved stars faced heartbreaking and tragic endings, from mysterious murders to sudden, devastating illnesses. Today, we look back at their legacies and the shocking stories behind the legends of Hee Haw, while honoring all that they left behind. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's dive in.
Miss Aikman come in through the door. I shot her as well.
Roy Clark as himself, Roy Linwood Clark, was born on April 15, 1933, and became part of America's cultural fabric as the host of Hee Haw, beginning in 1969 at the age of 36. For nearly 30 years, his warm smile, quick wit, and banjo in hand brought joy to millions of viewers. But behind the laughter was a man carrying deep scars. Raised in a poor family during the Great Depression, Roy's childhood was marked by hardship. Mocked for his love of country music, he grew shy and withdrawn, leaning on music as his only escape. As fame grew, he used humor to mask his pain until it became hard to distinguish the entertainer from the man behind the curtain. In 1957, his career took a painful blow when his mentor, Jimmy Dean, abruptly fired him for chronic lateness, an early sign of the rebellious streak and temper that would continue to strain professional relationships. Quietly, Roy turned to alcohol, calling it his way of shutting off the noise of loneliness. By the late 1980s, alcoholism had taken hold, leaving him passing out backstage, even as the sound of applause echoed from the stage. His personal life was equally complicated. His first marriage to Ruby Conley ended after only 3 years, though his second marriage to Barbara Ruppard endured until his death. It was often strained by long stretches of emotional distance and Roy's unwillingness to face his feelings. He had 5 children, yet his busy career and inner battles kept him from being the father he wished he could be. On November 15, 2018, Roy Clark passed away at his Tulsa home from complications of pneumonia at the age of 85. With an estimated net worth of $10 million built through performances, television, and endorsements, his success was undeniable. But for Roy, no amount of fame or fortune could erase the loneliness that lingered until the very end. Ronnie Stoneman, as herself. Veronica Loretta Stoneman, better known to the world as Ronnie Stoneman, was born on May 5, 1938, and became forever remembered as the First Lady of the Banjo. At just 31, she joined the cast of Hee Haw, where she brought life to Ida Lee Niggers, a sharp-tongued, long-suffering wife whose comedic skits mixed humor with an undercurrent of heartache. With her banjo in hand and a charm that spoke to rural America's working class, Ronnie became an essential voice of the show. Her roots were forged in hardship. The 15th of 23 children of legendary musician Ernest "Pop" Stoneman, Ronnie grew up in a home filled with chaos, poverty, and discipline. Music wasn't just encouraged, it was demanded. She spent her childhood practicing endlessly, fingers raw from string, often going to bed hungry, never quite allowed to be a child. Her father's rigid expectations instilled in her the belief that she had to earn her place in the world. Every laugh she delivered to an audience came at the cost of pain she carried quietly. When her father passed in 1968, Ronnie tried to carve her own path in music. Yet despite her talents and Hee Haw fame, her career was overshadowed by her male co-stars. She endured small-time gigs, low pay, and industry discrimination that left her in long bouts of emotional struggle. "They paid me with laughter," she once said, "but life demanded my whole heart." In her later years, Ronnie often performed at local fairs with her sister, Donna, the last surviving Stoneman sibling. Even as her health declined, she never stopped smiling for the crowds. What fans didn't see were the fainting spells backstage, or the lonely nights spent sleeping in her car when she couldn't afford a motel. On February 22nd, 2024, Ronnie Stoneman passed away at the age of 85. Her net worth was estimated at around $1 million, a modest sum for someone who had given over 6 decades of her life to music, comedy, and performance. Though her path was never easy, Ronnie left behind a legacy of resilience, humor, and unforgettable music. Buck Owens as himself, Diterti, Alvis Edgar. Buck Owens Jr. was born on August 12, 1929, and became one of country music's most influential figures. At 40 years old, he stepped into living rooms across America as co-host of Hee Haw in 1969, already a superstar with 21 #1 hits, and the creation of the unmistakable Bakersfield sound. Alongside his best friend and musical partner, Don Rich, Buck reshaped American music forever. Yet, behind the spotlight and the fame, his life was scarred by heartbreak, broken relationships, and a loneliness he could never shake. The turning point came in 1974, when Don Rich was killed in a motorcycle accident. For Buck, it wasn't just the loss of a friend, it was the loss of his soul. "That was the day the music inside me died," he later admitted. From that moment, his creativity dimmed. His records lost their spark, and though Hee Haw continued, Buck often seemed like a hollowed-out version of himself, coasting on autopilot. The grief hardened him. He grew distrustful, short-tempered, and intimidating to those around him. Former employees described a man who often threatened others and ruled through fear. His personal life reflected the same turbulence. He married 4 times, 3 marriages ending in divorce, and 1 annulled. His first wife, Bonnie, left just as his career was taking off, and later unions collapsed under conflict and emotional distance. One marriage to violinist Jana Jay ended in annulment only days after it began. Away from the stage, Buck poured himself into business. He built a media empire through Buck Owens Enterprises, purchasing multiple radio stations and amassing a fortune. Yet, no amount of wealth or success could fill the void left by Don Rich. Even his 1988 comeback duet with Dwight Yoakam, Streets of Bakersfield, felt less like a revival and more like a bittersweet echo of what once was. On March 25, 2006, after performing at his beloved Crystal Palace nightclub, Buck Owens died in his sleep from a heart attack at the age of 76. He left behind a musical legacy that changed the sound of country music and a fortune estimated at $100 million. Still, those closest to him knew that, despite the glittering success, Buck Owens had spent his later years haunted by a loss he never truly recovered from: Merle Haggard as himself. Merle Haggard, born on April 6, 1937, made several unforgettable appearances on Hee Haw during the 1970s when he was in his 30s. Unlike many of the cast, he didn't play a fictional character. He simply played himself, and that was more than enough. With his weathered face, rebellious spirit, and a voice lined with grit and regret, Merle embodied a kind of authenticity that couldn't be faked. His music carried the raw truth of a man who had lived on the edge, and his outlaw image wasn't a costume. It was his life. Behind the fame, though, lay a childhood marked by hardship. At just 9 years old, Merle lost his father, a devastating loss that would shape the rest of his life. His grieving mother became strict and overbearing, while Merle grew restless and defiant. As a teenager, he ran away repeatedly, landing in constant trouble with the law. Arrests for petty crimes, fights, and even escapes from juvenile detention became part of his story, until eventually he ended up in San Quentin State Prison, one of America's toughest facilities. It was there, behind prison walls, that Merle witnessed Johnny Cash perform for the inmates. That moment lit a fire within him. He made a promise to himself that day. When he got out, he would change. And he did. Music became his salvation, his therapy, his confession, his redemption. With songs like Mama Tried, Sing Me Back Home, and Branded Man, Merle transformed pain into poetry, giving sorrow both meaning and beauty. But even as his career soared, his demons never fully left him. Merle was married 5 times, with most of those relationships unraveling in jealousy, infidelity, and heartbreak. He openly battled cocaine addiction, depression, and dark moments where he admitted to contemplating ending his life. No matter how loud the applause, the shadows of his past always lingered. Despite the turmoil, Merle achieved greatness. He won 3 Grammy Awards, influenced generations of artists, and even received a full pardon from President Ronald Reagan. Yet, the weight of his early struggles never completely lifted. In his later years, Merle was diagnosed with lung cancer, a fight that dragged on for years. Still, he refused to slow down. He kept touring, kept singing, sometimes with an oxygen tank hidden under his shirt, as he poured every ounce of himself into his performances. The stage was where he belonged, right up to the end. On April 6, 2016, his 79th birthday, Merle Haggard passed away peacefully at his California home from complications of pneumonia. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at around $40 million. But that number hardly reflects what he truly left behind: a body of work that turned hardship into timeless music, and a legacy that proved beauty could be born from even the hardest of lives. Stringbean as himself. Cheat David Stringbean Aikman, born on June 17, 1915, was a man America would come to know by his stage name, Stringbean. With his lanky frame, banjo in hand, and trousers sagging below the knees, he created an unforgettable character. Part scarecrow, part philosopher, with a knack for sharp one-liners and homespun humor. When he joined Hee Haw at age 54, he became one of the show's most beloved fixtures, charming audiences with his awkward but endearing routines. But the gentle clown carried a life story steeped in hardship, grit, and tragedy. Raised in poverty in rural Kentucky, Stringbean bartered 2 chickens for his very first banjo. Unable to read or write, he relied on music, comedy, and even semi-pro baseball to survive. Wealth was never his aim. He found joy in simplicity, clinging to the old-time banjo style that honored tradition more than fame. Said he married Estelle Stanfill, his devoted partner, and though they faced financial strains and the weight of his guarded private nature, the bond endured. But Stringbean never trusted banks. Scarred by the Great Depression, he kept his savings in cash, rumored to be hidden in the walls and floorboards of their modest Tennessee home. His total worth was around $2 million. Yet the whispers of stashed money would one day seal his fate. On the night of November 10th, 1973, after performing at the Grand Ole Opry, Stringbean and Estelle returned home, unaware that 2 intruders were waiting. The moment he stepped inside, Stringbean was shot dead. Estelle's screams for mercy were met with gunfire. By morning, their neighbor and fellow Hee Haw castmate, Grandpa Jones, discovered the bodies. The killers, John and Marvin Brown, had taken little more than a few firearms and a chainsaw. Both were convicted, but the horror of their crime cast a long shadow. One of them wouldn't be paroled until 2014, more than 4 decades later. The murder of Stringbean and Estelle shocked the nation, a brutal reminder that even the most innocent could fall victim to senseless violence. They were laid to rest at Forest Lawn Memorial Gardens in Goodlettsville, Tennessee. To this day, fans still visit their graves, leaving flowers and letters, tokens of love for a man who once read letters from home to millions, never knowing how deeply he himself would be missed. Minnie Pearl as herself, Sarah Ophelia Colley Cannon, born on October 25, 1912, became a legend the moment she stepped on stage as Minnie Pearl. With her bright smile, ruffled dress, and that famous $1.98 price tag swinging from her hat, she greeted the world with her iconic words, "Howdy, I'm just so proud to be here." For decades, she was the heart and soul of Hee Haw, joining in 1969 at age 57 and delighting audiences until 1991. But behind the laughter and the Southern charm lay a far more complicated story. Minnie's rise to fame came from grit and determination, traveling the South, working tiny stages as a performer and director, and carving her own path in a male-dominated world. Her first major heartbreak came in the late 1960s, when she lent her name to Minnie Pearl's Fried Chicken. Though she had no role in running the business, the chain collapsed under corruption and stock manipulation, leaving her reputation in ruins. She was dragged into public scandal, haunted by shame and betrayal for years afterward. Her marriage to Henry Cannon, a former fighter pilot turned manager, lasted decades and seemed unshakable from the outside. But with no children and long stretches on the road, distance quietly grew between them. Minnie poured everything she had into her audiences, but the price was often silence and solitude when the curtains closed. The darkest chapter came in the early 1990s when she was diagnosed with breast cancer. Surgery, chemotherapy, and a double mastectomy tested her body and spirit. But instead of surrendering, Minnie became a powerful advocate. She spoke openly about her battle, helping to break the silence surrounding the disease, and became the face of a cancer center that would eventually carry her name and spread across the US and the UK. By then, she had amassed an estimated net worth of about $5 million, yet no amount of success could stop her decline. In June 1991, a devastating stroke ended her career and left her frail. The final years of her life were spent in a Nashville nursing home, where friends and young artists would visit. But the bright lights and laughter of the stage were gone forever. On March 4th, 1996, Minnie Pearl passed away at age 83, following another stroke. She left behind not just the memory of a beloved character, but the legacy of a woman who turned humor into healing and transformed her personal pain into a gift of joy and courage for millions. Grandpa Jones as himself. Louis Marshall. Grandpa Jones, born October 20th, 1913, became one of the most unforgettable faces of Hee Haw when he joined the cast in 1969 at age 56. With his banjo, old-timey humor, and trademark cry of "outrageous," he charmed audiences for more than 2 decades. But behind the makeup of the cheerful country, Grandpa was a man who carried a lifetime of hardship, poverty, and quiet struggles. The youngest of 10 children born to a sharecropping family, Jones grew up in relentless poverty. Music became his survival, passed down from his parents, and he jumped into radio shows just to get by. His early years as a performer were unstable, moving from town to town, scraping together money, and sometimes borrowing just enough to keep playing. During World War II, he put his career aside to serve. But when he returned, his youth had slipped away. Fame was still out of reach, and money remained scarce. It was his moody, weary temperament in those early years that earned him the nickname Grandpa when he was only 22, a name that stuck for life. His marriage to fellow musician Ramona Riggins was his anchor, and together they built a rare partnership that lasted over 30 years. Still, even their love was shadowed by financial strain and his declining health. The darkest blow came in 1973, when Jones walked into the aftermath of his closest friend's murder. He was the one who discovered the bodies of David Stringbean Akeman and Akeman's wife after a brutal home invasion. The trauma was devastating. Jones became a key witness at the trial, but the grief haunted him, hardening him and pulling him even further away from the spotlight. Though inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame in January 1998, his triumph was short-lived. After one final performance at the Grand Ole Opry, the stage he cherished most, Jones suffered 2 massive strokes. Less than a month later, on February 19, 1998, he passed away at the age of 84 in a Hermitage, Tennessee nursing home. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at $2 million, a modest figure for a man who gave his entire life to country music and performance. Grandpa Jones may not have been the richest or most famous star of his era, but his voice, his banjo, and his laughter left a mark that endures. George Jones as himself. Lewis Marshall. Grandpa Jones, born October 20th, 1913, became a cornerstone of Hee Haw in 1969 at age 56. With his banjo, lively yodels, and mischievous grin, he embodied the country grandpa audiences adored, reviving the old-time spirit of rural comedy and music. Yet, behind the straw hat and laughter was a man who carried deep scars of hardship and loss. Raised in a large sharecropping family, Jones grew up in poverty, forced into survival mode from childhood. Music became his only way out, and though he eventually earned spots on the Grand Ole Opry and, later, the Country Music Hall of Fame, he never stopped worrying about money. His frugality and constant anxiety strained his marriage to Ramona Riggins, a fellow performer and steadfast partner who shared the stage with him for more than 30 years. The darkest chapter of his life came in 1973, when Jones made a horrifying discovery. Arriving at the home of his close friend and fellow Hee Haw castmate, David Stringbean Ackerman, he found the bodies of Stringbean and his wife Estelle, brutally murdered during a burglary. The trauma left Jones shaken for the rest of his life. He withdrew, became quieter, and wrestled with sleepless nights, haunted by the memory. In his later years, Jones and Ramona settled in Ridgetop, Tennessee. But aging brought mounting health problems, heart failure, high blood pressure, and even signs of early memory decline. In January 1998, after what would be his final performance at the Grand Ole Opry, Jones collapsed from 2 consecutive strokes. Despite medical care, he passed away just weeks later, on February 19, 1998, at McKendree Village Nursing Home, at the age of 84. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at about $2 million, a modest sum compared to the vast artistic legacy he left behind. More than wealth or fame, Tammy Wynette as herself. Tammy Wynette, born May 5, 1942, became one of country music's most iconic voices, remembered as the First Lady of Country Music. She rose to fame in her late 20s, even making guest appearances on Hee Haw, where she performed as herself, a singer whose heartfelt ballads resonated with millions. But behind the spotlight was a life filled with heartbreak, turmoil, and pain. Growing up poor in Mississippi, Tammy worked in cotton fields and taught herself piano by ear, singing gospel to support her children. Her rise to stardom was fueled by determination, but overshadowed by turbulent relationships. Her marriages told a story of chaos. Her first ended in heartbreak and depression, leading to electroshock therapy. Her second, to Don Chappell, dissolved amid lawsuits and scandal. Her third, to fellow country star George Jones, was both passionate and destructive, marked by arguments, addiction, and even violence, before ending in divorce in 1975. She later endured a brief 6-week marriage to Michael Tomlin, followed by her union with George Ritchie, who was later accused of manipulation and emotional abuse. Many close to her believed this marriage deepened her reliance on prescription drugs. Professionally, Wynette was unstoppable. With 20 #1 singles, including her most controversial anthem, Stand By Your Man, she became a defining voice of American country music. Yet fame carried its own price. After a hysterectomy, she suffered chronic abdominal pain and underwent multiple surgeries, becoming dependent on heavy medications like Demerol and Valium. On April 6, 1998, Tammy Wynette died at just 55 years old from a pulmonary blood clot at her home in Nashville. She was buried at Woodlawn Memorial Park, though controversy followed even in death. Her grave marker was initially replaced with her legal married name, Virginia W. Richardson, before fans and family fought to restore it to Tammy Wynette. At the time of her passing, her net worth was estimated at $10 million, a modest sum compared to the immense influence she left on country music. Loretta Lynn as herself. Loretta Lynn, born April 14, 1932, emerged as one of country music's most fearless voices, captivating audiences on Hee Haw in the early 1970s when she was in her 40s. Performing as herself, she brought raw honesty to her songs, telling stories rooted in real life. Yet, behind the spotlight was a woman who carried profound sorrow. Born into poverty in Kentucky's coal country, Loretta married at just 15 and became a mother at 16. Her 50-year marriage to Oliver Doolittle Lynn was marked by turbulence, a mix of love, betrayal, violence, and alcoholism. He was often unfaithful and at times abusive, but he also recognized her talent, buying her first guitar and encouraging her career. Fame came early, yet it could not shield her from heartbreak. She lost 2 children, one in a tragic accident, another to drug addiction, and the grief stayed with her, shaping her music into powerful, unflinching stories of struggle and resilience. Her hits, including Coal Miner's Daughter, You Ain't Woman Enough, and Don't Come Home A-Drinking, were more than chart toppers. They were anthems for women whose voices had been silenced, reflections of a life lived with courage amid adversity. In 2017, Loretta suffered a major stroke and a hip fracture from a fall. Though she could no longer perform on stage, she continued releasing music and publishing books, leaving a lasting mark on the industry. On October 4th, 2022, Loretta Lynn passed away peacefully at her home in Hurricane Mills, Tennessee, at the age of 90. Her net worth at the time was estimated at $65 million, a testament to a lifetime of talent, perseverance, and influence that transcended generations. Junior Samples as himself. Alvin Jr. Samples, born August 10, 1926, became a beloved comedic figure on Hee Haw in 1969 at age 43. Playing himself, a slow-talking, bumbling used car salesman, he brought joy and laughter to millions for 14 years. But behind the humor was a man who had faced hardship from the very beginning. Growing up in poverty, Junior only completed 6th grade and worked as a carpenter and race car driver to support himself. His break came from a tall tale about catching a giant fish, which turned him into a local radio sensation. Yet sudden fame brought new challenges, forcing him to juggle his public persona with family life. Junior struggled with alcoholism, which fueled fights, anger, and periods of deep loneliness. Though he and his wife, Grace Bolton, had 5 children, strained relationships and missed milestones weighed heavily on him. He also wrestled with self-consciousness about his background and his weight, which eventually reached nearly 400 pounds. On November 13, 1983, Junior Samples suffered a fatal heart attack at the age of 57, shocking the Southern entertainment world. His funeral, led by close friend Reverend Douglas Collins, drew hundreds of mourners who celebrated his life and legacy. At the time of his passing, his net worth was estimated at just $1 million, a modest sum, yet one that belied the laughter and joy he left behind for generations of fans. Archie Campbell as himself. Archie Campbell, born November 7, 1914, became a cornerstone of Hee Haw when he joined the cast at age 55. Playing himself, a clever, down-to-earth comedian, he delivered unforgettable skits like PFT, You Was Gone, Rinderella, and That's Bad, That's Good, helping define the show's signature rustic humor for nearly 2 decades. Tutado, but beyond the laughs, Archie's life was marked by relentless work and personal sacrifice. A multi-talented artist, actor, musician, writer, and script editor, he juggled a heavy creative workload few ever saw. Criticism that he was overshadowed by bigger stars like Roy Clark and Buck Owens often weighed on him, and long periods of travel strained his marriage and wore down his spirit. Even after being named Comedian of the Year by the CMA in 1969, Archie frequently withdrew quietly into the background, seeking solace in personal passions like golf and painting. He opened an art gallery, helped manage a school in Knoxville, and even pioneered the first lighted golf course in the United States. On August 29, 1987, Archie Campbell passed away suddenly from a heart attack at the age of 72, shocking fans across Tennessee. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at $2 million, accumulated through comedy albums, TV appearances, writing, and his artistic ventures. Like so many Hee Haw stars, left behind a rich legacy of laughter. But his life also reminds us that behind every joke and skit were real struggle, personal sacrifices, and untold stories of resilience.